And now I would like to introduce our next speaker, respectable sociologist, Olena Strelnyk. It's important, and I'm very glad that she graduated from our native, our alma mater, Kharkiv Karazin University Sociological Faculty, and she received her doctorate degree at the Kiev National University, named after Taras Grigorievich Shevchenko. And I would like to emphasize that her voice always sounds very convincing and independent. And I respect her critical thinking. And I suppose today we will have possibility to hear this very convincing voice. Please, Elena. Now, Elena Strelnyk is affiliated with the Technological University at the Munich, Germany, and we are glad to be here and to share our voices, to share our ideas, and we will be very happy to hear your independent, your very convincing opinion. Thank you, please.
Dear colleagues and dear participants, thank you very much for this possibility to speak on behalf of my country, first of all, not only on behalf of me as a displaced scholar, right? Let me start my my presentation. And I suppose that you are able to see my screen. And let me start from the beginning. Well, on February 24 this year, my life, the lives of my family and my country changed dramatically as a result of full-scale invasion of Russian Federation. I do not plan to talk about my personal trauma because of the war today, although it is an important part of my new identity as a woman, as a mother, and a women scholar. But I want to use this chance for the benefit of my country to make Ukrainian women scholars' voices stronger and more visible here and in Europe. The discussion about the war in Ukraine has aroused a number of important and challenging topics. Some are about the relevance of ideas of war in Western world to the situation in Ukraine, especially in the context of pacifism and anti-militarism, and statements including feminist one to not supply to weapon to Ukraine. Some discussions are about the hierarchy of the voices on speaking about Ukraine and whose voices are in fact prioritized. Some about marginal position of Ukrainian studies in Western Academy under the umbrella of East European research or even Russian and East European research. Today, I will focus on the situation on women in science in Ukraine with a focus on social studies and humanities because the share of women in these fields in Ukraine exceeds 60%. This context is important to understand the peculiarities of doing research and building academic career in Ukraine, while many women scholars came to Germany and other European countries after the full-scale war in Ukraine started. Then I will present my first reflections on the situation of displaced women scholars related to some messages related to the war for German Academy. Well, let me switch my slide and ein Moment bitte schon. Here you can see that the share of women among researchers in Ukraine is very high. It's almost 45%, which is high in comparison with, for instance, Germany, Luxembourg, France. Fluctuation in the share of women among scientists and researchers in the world depends on a number of factors. There are the level of wages in the field of doing research in science, the specifics of building an academic career, the ability to combine career with childcare, gender stereotypes about women and science. As we see, we have the strong tendency in so-called vertical gender segregation. As you can see, the share of women among researchers in Ukraine, again, is rather high, but at the same time, the share of women among so-called Doctor of Sciences is only 27%. I would like to emphasize that in Ukraine, we have the two scientific degrees, and the highest one is so-called Doctor of Sciences. Also, it depends definitely on the area of study. Thus, for example, the lowest share of women among Doctor of Sciences are in the field of transport. It's about only 7%, while, for example, in sociology, it's 53%, but in philosophy, only 16% are women. I mean, the share of women among so-called Doctor of Sciences, or which is equivalent Doctor Habilitat. One should add inequality among administrative staff. Can you imagine that in Ukraine, only 10% of women are among university rectors in Ukraine? But these and other challenges are often beyond the discourses on women and science. It is great and very important to honor the women's success in academic field, but the mainstream discourse about the women in science in Ukraine is represented mainly and exclusively by these success stories, rather than discussion on the challenges of women in building academic career. The high number of women in science in Ukraine is often mistakenly interpreted mostly as evidence of high success of women in society and their greater talent. Typically, structural reasons are beyond of these discourses. The high share of women in science, especially in certain fields of doing research, actually indicates the rather low status of science and research activity in general, because we are dealing here with a well-known trend. The more competitive and well-paid the field of activity, the fewer women there are. The last decade in Ukraine has been characterized by neoliberal reforms based on the idea of free market and a significant reduction of public and government funding of science and research on the background of growing state demands on the dissertations, researches, and publications in line with European standards to make Ukrainian science competitive on research market. I will say for our German colleagues in Ukraine that in Ukraine, scientific and research activities are carried out mainly in two types of institutions, universities and research institutions, in particular in the National Academy of Science. Both of these areas have been affected to some extent by neoliberal reforms over the past 2 years, which have led to the crisis in Ukrainian science and scholar positions. Crisis trends in the field of social studies, in humanities, both in the higher education institutions and the structures of National Academy of Science in Ukraine have intensified since 2014-15 on the background of the economic crisis after the Maidan Revolution and the war in Donbass. At the same time, there was a significant reduction in funding of the National Academy of Science. For example, in January 2016, the National Academy of Science began so-called optimization research in departments and reducing staff. As a result, it lost 20% of its employers, and almost 700 specialists under the age of 35 was forced to leave the academy. The reduction of staff, especially young people, continued in the following years. For example, one of my informants, Oksana, a researcher at one of the structure of National Academy of Science, says that mostly young people who have small children left the academy. Quotation, there are mostly middle-aged and older people stayed, and women who have wealthy partners or women who do not believe that they can realize themselves differently in the labor market. Some of those who stayed in the academy work part-time and receive low wages, sometimes minimum that is allowed by the state. Thus, Oksana was forced, as many her colleagues, to switch to part-time employment, and last year her salary was about 130 euro per month, despite the fact that she has an excellent performance indicator, including numerous internships in the world's best research institutions. In these situations, is related to the traditional gender order. Allow me to agree with my informants that doing research in Ukraine is mostly a hobby that allows a woman to live only with support of her partner. And I suppose that at least some of the strengths that I described are relevant as well to German academy. University researchers has also seen a reduction in salaries due to reduction in the number of students in general and change in the principles of funding public universities. The crisis in Ukrainian universities is partly explained by demographic trends, in particular by the decline of the number of young people in the population. At the same time, this crisis is largely due to transition of higher education to labor principles of regulation and competition. The crisis also caused changes in the principle of financing of public universities in Ukraine. I will say for our German colleagues that even public universities have two models of funding: public funds and private money of students. The so-called broad competition system assumes that public funds follow the best students, the best entrants. And the best entrants with the best grades are more likely to choose large universities in big cities. On the one hand, this is the good from the point of view of competition, but from the other hand, it has a downside. This is the worsening of the situation of university professors and scientists, reducing their salaries, closing departments, because especially regional universities, small universities, they are not so attractive for students. One of more important things related to the current war. Before the war, a significant number of young people entered universities in Europe. These problems will be even more acute now because a lot of universities, they have opened their doors to Ukrainian students. Even before the war, it was difficult for Ukrainian universities to compete with European one, but now the situation will be definitely more difficult. And I expect the significant decline of number of students who will enter Ukrainian universities, and it will definitely affect negatively on the situation of Ukrainian professors. And these processes happened on the background of the growth of state standards of scientific work and demanding so-called productivity of university professors, like the demand to have good publications, in journals of high quality, and this is definitely good. But high demands are generally fair, but they are often met at research's own expense. What I mean that Ukrainian scholars, they mainly have to go to conferences by their own expense, right? And even sometimes they have to pay for to have their own publications. In conditions of underfunding, many scholars are constantly looking for part-time jobs or grants or scholarships, including a broad one. This was a particular challenge for women with children. On the one hand, scholarships do not cover the costs on the family stays abroad. On the other hand, prolonged separation from the family causes anxiety, stress, and reduced productivity. And to be honest, not all partners are ready to support women's academic mobility. Well, let me go to some conclusions that low wages, forced part-time employment, short-term contracts, self-funded research, all these characteristics of the situation of scientists can be interpreted as a market of vulnerable or precarious position according to the British economist Guy Standing, right? I mean that unstable social situations, loss of stable prospects for full employment, unstable income, all these are markers of so-called precariosity or academic precariosity. This situation for Ukrainian scholars in undoubtedly exaggerated by the war as far as science will be even less funded because of the priority of military defense and armed forces in Ukraine, and frankly, in the conditions of the need for physical existential survival. I'm afraid there will be no place for doing research in Ukraine in the next couple of years at least. Many of Ukrainian women scholars came to Germany after the start of full-scale Russian invasion and war at the hospitable invitation of local universities, foundations. Like me, for instance, I came by the invitation of Technical University of Munich. But many of them are in very transitional state. Someone's position in universities and institutions of Ukraine are preserved and they continue to work remotely, but their salaries have been cut already. And just a couple of days ago, I have known that some universities, they would like that their staff would be back in Ukraine. Otherwise, this is a risk that scholars will be fired from Ukrainian university. I mean that scholars who work remotely. However, again, we have some alarming signals about this. But for some scholars, coming here is a chance for decent life and for continuing research. However, sooner or later, many women who will stay here will face the challenge of integrating into German academy and pursuing academic careers in a different context and with mostly lower starting positions as far as their opportunities for doing research in Ukraine were limited in order to form a strong competitive position now in Western academic community. In addition, their situation is burdened, as you can see on the slide, burdened by refugee situation, adaptation to living in other countries, short-term scholarship programs, the lack of stability, problems with finding housing, which is extremely, as you can, extremely great problem in Germany, the need to care for children and other relatives because many of women, they came here with their families. One should add a very complicated emotional situations in anxiety. I do not have, if I have a stipend when my current fellowship program will completed, will I have a housing, will I be able to return to Ukraine and something like that. However, I would like to end my speech on an optimistic and more constructive way. Everyone has their own front. Today, all women in Ukraine and beyond Ukraine do incredible work as combatants, volunteers, mothers, doctors, social workers, and women scholars thesis, nothing for us without us. I suppose it is necessary to give priority to Ukrainian scientists to talking about the war, to invite Ukrainians to research teams, especially when it comes to the research in the war or to the research of the situation with Ukrainian refugees who came to Germany and things like that. The second one, call the war a war, not a conflict, not a crisis, but a war and the invasion of Russian Federation. The third one, do not call or do not offer Ukraine to capitulate or make concession to Putin. With some Western intellectuals who sign letters to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine are ethically very questionable. This means a very cynical step to sacrifice the freedom of the whole country to deprive it of the right to its own development in favor to imaginary security in Europe, imaginable because actually nobody knows when Putin will stop. But Ukrainians, they are already dying. It's possible to speak about peace and to be a pacifist in theory if actually nobody expects the real invasion, right? But to be a pacifist when you are under the certain threat and your country are under the bombing, you know, it's not realistic and it's very harmful. The fourth one, it's not appropriate, it's my personal opinion, it's not good to launch the joint program for Russian and Ukrainian scholars. Well, it's very offensive. While Russian people, I suppose, mostly affected by the threat to be fired from a university or the restrictions of human rights, that is definitely bad. However, Ukrainians lost their homes, their relatives are killed, their children were raped by Russian soldiers, their families separated, our territories are occupied, our lives are completely destroyed. We can't put it in the same line with the situation with Russian scholars. The fifth one, please promote institutional change in supporting Ukrainian studies here as a separate research field, but not as a part of Slavic or East European studies. As I know, in Germany now, there is only one department, only one chair of Ukrainian studies. And the last one, stipends are a good immediate decision, but not in long run perspective. Sooner or later, scholars who came here will face with challenges of integration into German academy, and this path will be definitely not easy for them. We need some institutional solutions, including for those scholars who were not able to flee from Ukraine. But finally, I'm really grateful for this invitation and to all German universities for their kind support of Ukrainian scholars and the attention to my presentation. Thank you very much. Vielen Dank. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Olena, for your very deep, very interesting and very topical report. Your conclusions will be taken into account. Your voice will be heard, I'm sure, and really we will continue this such kind of conversation. And I wish you good luck and successfully continue your very important and very productive job. Thank you.
Perfect.